Even when you need to talk to everyone, like banks have to do, you still need to divide the audience in groups that are similar, so you can talk to them in the same way. No one wants to be talked in a way which is not the right one. That's an error that the Clinton campaign made in the US. They tried to talk to everybody in the same way. In this video, we will see how banks do things differently and how Trump managed to win the race by adapting his message to what people really felt. This video from Eurostat is quite interesting, not because of the topic, the average European, but also because we tend to gather all the data we have on people and mix them into one sort of strange figure that doesn't look like anyone. And if this video is about the data, we tend to do the same thing in communication. I took the example of this guy who certainly lives in at least half of the brochures in Brussels. And he's coming from a database of pictures because he looks like anyone could look. But if you think about it, no one really looked like him. Is a sort of fake representation of what the general public would do. In this case, people working in offices. The general public is an interesting notion because it doesn't mean much, and we use it all the time. The Merriam-Webster dictionary will tell us that the general public are all the people of an area or of a country, which means in Europe 400 million people. And the Macmillan Dictionary goes even further. Ordinary people in society rather than people who are considered to be important. I think that's a quite interesting definition when we use general public. It means that we consider these people as unimportant. So if you're considering someone as not important, it might not be a good starting point to talk to them on their own terms and to reach them. I've worked some years ago with a bank, BNP Paribas, and that bank is one of the largest in Europe, and they have a classification of people in 3 categories that are themselves subdivided into 3 other categories. Banks are interesting because they cater to almost 100% of the population. As soon as you're 12, 13 years old, your parents open you a bank account and you have a bank account your whole life. Very few people are out of the system. So in a way, they are the only one to really analyze when we're talking about the general public. And their way of categorizing the population is very interesting. They divide us into 3 different stages. The first stage happens when you're young, 21 to 35 years old, because at that moment in your life, you go through a number of things, like you enter the workforce, so you start to earn a salary, you get married, you have children eventually, and very specifically, you develop financial habits, things that you will keep doing the rest of your life. You might purchase a car or a home, that means you could potentially take a credit, and you might finance your wedding. On stage 2, once you start to grow in your career, your family grows as well. You advance professionally, and you might get an inheritance as well. You might purchase more homes, other type of real estate, you accumulate wealth. You're funding college education for your kids. All these things are detailed in the model of a bank because once you reach stage 2, the majority of people who do reach this stage will behave in a similar way. The third stage, 55 to 80 years old, is when you finally get this major promotion at the end of your career, when you plan for retirement. You might have the death of a spouse happening. Your grandchildren are there. And that means in banking terms, you have a greater tax sensitivity, you try to preserve your wealth, and you're planning for more purchase or more estates. These 3 stages cover almost 90% of the population in Europe and in the world. And banks subcategorize these 3 stages even more by placing 3 new categories between wealthy customers, people who might need the attention of someone specific at the bank to follow the investment of their wealth, medium customers, people who might bring some profits to the bank but are not big spenders or do not take huge credits. And finally, unprofitable customers, people who would mostly cost money to the bank, some of them, for instance, still visiting agencies and really doing hand paper work. So these people are costing money and might not receive a lot of attention because they do not consume a lot of services. So these 9 stages in the bank classification of target audiences is very interesting because they cover, as I said, most of the population, but still we divide the audience into categories because that way we can address the people in this category in a very more personalized manner. The big classification in target audiences rely on 2 notions, demographics and psychographics. Demographics, you know them. It's when you're talking about the age of someone, his gender, his education, where he's living, all these things that allow us to build a big group of customers. And usually you will talk to male, 25 to 35 years old, who play sports and do something else. These people have a commonality, which is interesting. But it's not enough to know how to talk to them on their own terms. So we use, in this case, a second distinction, which is psychographics. And psychographics help us dig a little more into the quality of a human being. For instance, these are questions like, what is a hobby you would practice? If you're a football player or a rugby player, you have 2 different worlds. And these 2 worlds do not coexist really well. And we're talking just about one single difference in sport. So if you take what sort of magazine people read, what sort of pages they like on Facebook, then you dig a lot more into what they like and dislike. And for a communicant, it's all about adjusting your message to what someone already likes, so you can convince that person that what you're doing is important. This video was trying to cover most of the big ideas on targeting, on micro-targeting, and how we need to know the audience. I try to provide some tools to you, but this work is always ongoing. You need to research at all time who's your target audience is and what do they very much like, whether it's by collecting data or understanding them as human beings if you don't have a lot of people to touch. This is the ongoing work in communication. It doesn't have to be expensive, but it has to be done. And if you're thinking about talking to the general public, I can already tell you, you will not manage to do it because even with 400 million euros spent per year, the European institutions have trouble to do that. So if you're an NGO or lobby, you have to be realistic and know perfectly well who you're talking to with the means of your budget. Thank you very much for following this video and see you next week.